I was just trying to balance the tray. Coffee sloshing in a paper cup. Plastic forks sliding toward the edge. Overhead, the fluorescent lights hummed that tired, electrical buzz every hospital has. I shifted the tray from my right hand to my left, and my sleeve slipped back just enough to show a strip of ink on my forearm. That was all it took. At the next table, 3 younger sailors in fresh-pressed uniforms noticed. One elbowed the other. A quick smirk, then a little burst of laughter that they thought I couldn't hear. "Nice skull, ma'am," one of them muttered, just loud enough to impress his buddies. I didn't answer. I've been shot at. I've been on helicopters where the floor was slick with other people's blood. 3 kids laughing at my tattoo felt like background noise. Then the elevator behind me dinged. You learn to recognize footsteps long before you recognize faces. These were heavy, slow, sure. Not a patient. Not a kid. Someone who walks like the hallway belongs to him. I turned just enough to see the rank on his chest first. SEAL Trident. Commander. He wasn't looking at my badge. He wasn't looking at my face. His eyes dropped straight to my forearm. The tray in his hand rattled once against the metal rail, a tiny sound I felt in my teeth. The room didn't actually go silent, but it felt like it did. He froze. Not at me. At the ink. At the memory burned into both of us. His mouth moved, just a whisper, meant for no one. "You were on that hill." And suddenly, their laughter didn't matter at all. Dawn always comes too gently after nights like that. I remember the light before I remember the pain. A pale gray strip along the horizon, stretched thin like someone pulled morning across the sky with trembling hands. The helicopter's rotors were still ticking down when I opened my eyes. Slow, uneven clicks. Not the deep chopping thud from the air, but the cooling sound metal makes after it's been pushed too hard for too long. Warmth trickled down my arm. I didn't know yet whether it was mine. The medic next to me shouted something I couldn't hear. My ears were still ringing from the blast. My mouth was dry and tasted like sand and iron. Someone lifted my legs, and a stretcher shifted under me. Straps tightened across my chest. The world tilted, then steadied. I saw boots first. Rows of them. Some standing. Some still. Some pointed in directions that made no sense. Then I saw the bags. 4 of them. Black. Neat. Zippers fully closed. My stomach clenched. That was when the shaking started, not from fear, but from the shock wearing off. I forced myself to breathe through it. In through the nose, out through the mouth. The same rhythm I used behind a rifle, behind a patient, behind anything that required my pulse to obey. A hand touched my shoulder. Our team sergeant. Or what was left of him. His face was streaked with soot and dried blood. One eye already swelling shut. "You're awake," he mouthed. I nodded. I didn't trust my throat yet. We were on the far edge of the forward operating base. A field hospital tent loomed ahead, the fabric snapping lightly in the wind like someone flicking a sheet. Machines beeped inside, steady, indifferent. I watched them roll in another stretcher. Then another. Then a body bag. That was when the guilt hit. We'd gone up that hill together. Not all of us came down. I felt the 4-needle tug against my skin as someone clipped it into place. A medic checked my vitals, scribbling something on a clipboard. Behind her, I saw a radio operator sitting on a cot, head in his hands. His fingers were shaking. His rifle still on his back. A monitor beeped too loud, too slow. Someone yelled, "BP dropping!" Someone else pulled back a curtain. I smelled antiseptic, sweat, earth, and burned fabric. War has a smell people don't talk about. It gets into your clothes and your mouth and your hair, even after you shower. You carry it like a second skin. The pain in my ribs sharpened as a corpseman pressed down, counting, checking for fractures. I winced. He muttered something apologetic. "Lucky you weren't higher up the ridge," he said, not looking at me. He didn't know why that wasn't true. Because higher up the ridge was where the others were. Where I should have been. Someone dropped a metal tray. It clattered across the floor. I flinched, instincts firing before my brain caught up. My sergeant gave me a small nod, an acknowledgement we both knew the meaning of. You survived, even if you don't feel like it. After what felt like hours, the chaos softened. The sun climbed. Shadows shortened. A medic finally brought me water. I sipped slowly. The world stopped spinning. That's when I noticed it. A torn piece of fabric sticking out from under one of the bags. A familiar logo, our unit patch. Half burned. The stitching frayed. I reached for it. My fingers brushed the edge. Cold. Stiff. The medic tried to pull my hand back, but I closed my fist around the scrap and held on. It wasn't courage. It wasn't even grief. It was something quieter, heavier. Responsibility. A promise I made without speaking. By midday, they cleared me for temporary duty in the rear. Minimal activity, the doctor said. Rest. Reassess in 72 hours. But my eyes were still on the bags. On the scrap of fabric I pressed into my palm. On the faces that weren't walking out with me. Later, much later, that scrap would become part of the tattoo. A line for each one we lost. Ink for the things no after-action report ever wrote down. And in that dawn, standing on legs that barely worked, I made myself a quiet vow. You don't get to forget. Even if everyone else tries to. The first thing they took from me wasn't a weapon. It was my schedule. In the field, time moved by necessity. Night raids, dawn medevacs, quick minutes where decisions meant life or death. Back home, time moved by appointment. By sign-in sheets. By waiting rooms. I remember the hallway more than the office. Neutral walls. Neutral art. Frames with generic ocean scenes that had never seen salt air. The smell of coffee that had been sitting too long on a warmer. A TV in the corner playing some morning show with bright colors and laughing hosts. The sound was turned down, so their smiles looked wrong. My name appeared on a digital check-in screen. Last name. First initial. A number that meant I was now an entry in a system instead of a call sign in a squad. I sat in a row of chairs that all matched. My boots felt too heavy for the carpet. My hands rested on my knees, knuckles scarred, one fingernail still showing a faint line of dried dust that refused to scrub off. Every time the door opened, I looked up by reflex, expecting a shouted order, a mission brief, anything with urgency. Instead, people walked out holding folders. Eventually, they called my number. Just a chime and a line on the screen changing color. No voice. I stood, followed the hallway past doors half open, glimpsing glimpses of other lives, someone staring at an X-ray, someone filling out a form, someone rubbing their temples like their headaches had become permanent. Inside the office, everything was too clean. Desk. Computer. Neatly stacked papers. A small flag in a stand. Certificates on the wall in black frames. The person behind the desk looked at my file more than at me. Their lips moved. I watched them form words about limited duty, psychological evaluation, physical strain, long-term impact. None of it sounded like the Hill. They pointed to lines on forms. I signed. Medical history. Injury reports. Acknowledgement of briefing. Options for rehabilitation. Boxes to tick for symptoms. Sleep trouble. Flashbacks. Hypervigilance. I checked fewer than I should have. Old habits. Never give the system more than it needs. Another building. Another office. Another set of chairs. This one had a water dispenser. Cups stacked in a leaning column. I took one, drank half, watched the level drop as if the water could measure how much of myself was left. An admin handed me a manila folder. Inside, copies of my discharge recommendations, duty limitations, referral notes. I flipped through them. My name was spelled right. That always felt like a small victory. Under primary specialty. The line that had once written out my combat role now had a second line added underneath. Suitable for clinical assignment / stateside medical facility. Paper had reassigned my war. The evaluations went on for days. Physical therapy rooms with racks of elastic bands and treadmills. Doctors in white coats clicking through images of my scans on monitors. A mental health counselor's office with soft chairs, a box of tissues, and a plant that might have been fake. No one raised their voice. No one bled. No one shouted for a tourniquet. They asked about pain levels. I described ranges on a scale instead of what it actually felt like. They asked about sleep. I described duration instead of what I saw behind my eyes. They asked about adjustment. I described routines instead of the way my hand still twitched toward a rifle that wasn't there when a car backfired outside. In the evenings, I went back to temporary quarters. A small room. Standard issue bed. Locker. Desk. The kind of place you could leave in 20 minutes if orders changed. On the second night, I spread my gear on the bed. Uniform pieces, folded with habit. Name tapes. Unit patches. The scrap of burned fabric I had taken from under the bag. It lay on the blanket like a piece of old skin. I stared at it for a long time. For bags. For names. For stories I knew better than anyone who would ever read the final report. I didn't want a plaque on a wall. I didn't want a framed certificate. I wanted something that couldn't be taken down when a building changed hands or a command rotated out. So, on one of my few off hours, I walked off base into a small strip of businesses just outside the gate. Barber shop. Laundromat. A pawn shop with guitars in the window. And a tattoo studio with its sign half burned out. Inside, it smelled like antiseptic and old ink. Machines buzzed in the back like distant wasps. The artists didn't ask many questions. They had seen uniforms before. They had seen that tired, focused look in more than one set of eyes. I laid the scrap of fabric on the counter. Explained what each symbol used to look like. What mattered. What needed to stay hidden inside, and what could live on the skin. No names. No dates. Just a design only a few people in the world would recognize. A hill line. For faint marks like notches. A subtle pattern that matched our unit's private insignia, the one we never put on anything official. It would sit on my forearm, where I could see it every day. Where my hand could rest over it when the weight of memory got too loud. The needle burned. A different kind of pain. Clean. Chosen. When it was done, I looked at my arm and felt something settle. Not peace. Not yet. But an anchor. A few months later, after the paperwork circled through all the offices it needed to, the reassignment orders came. Stateside Naval Medical Center. Clinical role. Focus on trauma care and critical patients. Superiors framed it as recognition of my experience. A way to keep serving, without unnecessary risk. So I packed my bag. Folded my uniforms. Slid my documents into a folder. My hand lingered on one item before I closed the zipper, a small pouch with dog tags that weren't mine. At the new facility, I was issued a badge with my photo, name, and department. I clipped it to my scrub top. I learned the layout, ICU here, or there, break room down the hall. I memorized where the crash carts sat, how long it took an elevator to move between floors, where the quiet corners were when I needed to breathe. No one there knew about the hill at first. They just saw another nurse. Another veteran. Another body in motion keeping the building running. The tattoos stayed under my sleeve. Hidden. Until the day it wasn't. Until the day I balanced a cafeteria tray, my sleeve slipped, and laughter brushed against a piece of ink that had never been a joke. You learn a lot about a place by the papers it tries to hide. In a hospital, military or not, information moves like blood. Smooth when things are normal. Erratic when something's wrong. I didn't go looking for trouble. I only went looking for the truth behind a patient file that felt off. It started on a slow Tuesday. The kind of shift where the alarms only chirp instead of scream. I was reviewing intake notes for a trauma case when I saw a word that didn't belong on a routine chart. Anvil. A code name. Buried in the additional context field. Probably typed by mistake. My chest tightened. ANVA wasn't a medical term. It wasn't a place. It wasn't a piece of equipment. It was the unofficial name for the operation on that hill. I froze, one hand still on the mouse, the other slowly curling over my forearm where the tattoo lay under my sleeve. At first, I told myself it was a coincidence. A misentry. Autocorrect gone rogue. But when I checked the timestamp on the file, something else caught my eye, the date. 3 days after the hill. 3 days after the bags. 3 days after the world rearranged itself inside my ribs. And the patient listed? A SEAL. One I didn't remember seeing in the medevac rotation. The wound descriptions didn't match the official report I'd read months earlier. Wrong angles. Wrong shrapnel size. Wrong type of blast debris. The notes said, vehicle rollover. But the lacerations were from fragmentation, not metal. I'd seen that pattern before. Up close. Too close. My pulse climbed, slow but steady. I checked another file. Then another. Same phrasing. Same vague causes. Same. Vehicle rollover. Copied and pasted across 3 months of reports. 3 different names. 3 different ranks. All involved in that same operation, but officially nowhere near it. It wasn't sloppiness. It was a script. A template used to rewrite the truth. I printed the first file. The printer coughed out the page with a soft mechanical groan. I slid it under a stack of discharged documents so no one would see. Then I went deeper. Our database had layers: authorized access, departmental access, administrative access. I stayed within my permissions, but even there, I found shadows. Redacted lines where nothing should have been redacted. Sections labeled "See classified supplement." Identity numbers that didn't match the treatment logs. Someone high up had scrubbed the real story. But they had left the wounds. I scrolled through images attached to one report, a cross-section of shrapnel removed from a patient's thigh. I leaned closer. The fragments were unmistakable, ceramic composite material used in a very specific type of improvised device. The same kind used on the hill. The same kind that killed my team. But the official report had claimed the enemy used none of those materials in that region. The after-action summary, stamped with an officer's signature, said the attack was improbable, inconsistent with known enemy capability. Yet here was the proof. The enemy had been capable. And we'd been left there anyway. I sat back in my chair. My throat felt tight. The hum of the computer fan sounded louder. I flexed my hand over the tattoo again, grounding myself. One more file. This one was different. More heavily redacted. Whole fields missing. But the operation code buried in the metadata caught my breath, A17B. Our op designation. Only 3 people were supposed to know that code. The commander, my sergeant, and me. Someone had tried to bury these injuries under a pile of incorrect labels. Someone who needed the official narrative to stay clean. Someone who didn't expect a reassigned nurse to notice. But patterns are old friends to people who survive missions that go wrong. Angles. Timings. Distances. Silence. The truth leaves a trace even when people try to erase it. I printed the second file. Then the third. Each page felt heavier than paper. By the end of my shift, I had a small stack hidden inside a plain folder I kept under my scrubs in my locker. Nothing dramatic. Nothing illegal. Just copies of inconsistencies, discrepancies, and clues, enough to make a reasonable person ask questions. And enough to make the wrong person panic. Before leaving the hospital that night, I passed a bulletin board in the hallway. A memo had been pinned there, administrative language, nothing special. But the signature at the bottom made my stomach twist. The same SEAL commander who would freeze at my tattoo days later. His name. His rank. His pen. On documents that didn't match the wounds I held in my folder. I walked out of the hospital with the folder pressed tight against my ribs. The night air was cool, but my skin felt hot, like the ink under my sleeve had started to burn. A lie was spreading through the system. And the truth was sticking to the edges, waiting for someone who remembered the hill to pull the thread. I was already tugging. The night I decided to confront the truth didn't feel dramatic. It felt practical. Cold air. Low clouds. A parking lot that smelled like wet concrete. My badge clipped to my scrub top like it was any other shift. But the folder inside my bag, thin, plain, unmarked, had a weight that pulled at the strap on my shoulder. I didn't tell anyone where I was going. You don't announce missions like this. You move quietly. You choose the time when the world is least awake and most honest. The message came through the hospital's internal bulletin: SEAL Commander, Inspection Tour, Personnel Review. A routine visit on paper. Those always mask something else. If he was the one who stamped those files, he would know why the truth had been rewritten. If he wasn't, he would still recognize what the tattoo meant. Either way, I needed answers. I left an hour before my shift. The sky had turned a dull navy blue, neither night nor morning. A drizzle spit sideways across the windshield as I drove toward the base. The wipers dragged water in tired arcs. My headlights carved shallow tunnels into the mist. A voice in the back of my mind whispered, "This feels like prep." And it was. Not for war. For clarity. At the base gate, the guard checked my ID. He waved me through with the bored confidence of someone who expects the night to stay quiet. The road inside was lined with dim, orange lamps casting syrupy light across the asphalt. My tires hissed through puddles. I parked near the medical building but didn't go inside. Not yet. Instead, I walked toward the west perimeter, the older side of the base, where the airfield sat like a sleeping giant. A place where engines hummed even when no one was watching. The rain picked up, soft at first, then steady. It pattered on the hood of my jacket, rolled down my sleeves, soaked into the edges of my scrubs. I didn't speed up. I didn't slow down. Each step felt deliberate, like I was moving back into a rhythm I hadn't used since the hill. At the perimeter fence, I heard it. A low mechanical hum. Helicopter rotors idling. I turned toward the sound. Past the hangar, a Black Hawk sat on the tarmac under floodlights, its blades turning in lazy circles. The rain made the air shimmer around them. A crew chief walked around the aircraft, checking panels, tapping metal with practiced hands. The smell hit me next, jet fuel mixed with wet asphalt. It always made my chest tighten. Not in fear, just memory. The way muscle remembers cold metal and vibration, and wind that tastes like salt and dust. I stood at the chain-link fence for a moment, letting the hum settle into my bones. Letting myself acknowledge what I was really doing, going back into a fight that wasn't physical anymore. A security patrol passed behind me, their boots crunching. I stepped away before they could ask questions. Inside the medical building, everything felt too bright. Too clean. I went straight to the records room, small, fluorescent lit, with rows of filing cabinets like metal tombstones. My badge beeped as I scanned into the restricted section. The door clicked shut behind me. It was quiet, dead quiet, the kind of silence that lets you hear your own breath. I set my bag on the table and opened it. The folder inside was worn at the edges from being handled too many times. I laid out the papers, printouts, wound descriptions, timestamps, metadata logs, a copy of the redacted op code. Then I pulled out one more item. A dog tag. Not mine. Not anymore. I set it beside the papers. A silent witness. A reminder of why lies matter. I accessed the terminal. Typed in my credentials. The system opened. I searched the commander's inspection schedule. Personnel review. 0800. Administrative briefing. And then one line. 0430, private meeting, unspecified. Unspecified meetings never mean nothing. I printed the schedule, slid it into the folder, and snapped it shut. My hands were steady. My breathing was not. The hall outside was dimmer. A single maintenance light flickered at the far end like it was unsure whether to stay awake. My footsteps echoed softly. Every movement felt like infiltration again, checking corners, listening for sounds behind doors, watching for shadows. At the end of the hall, an elevator dinged open. Empty. I stepped inside. The metal walls reflected faint shapes. My jacket, my hair pulled back tight, the folder clutched under my arm. I looked like a nurse heading to prep for morning rounds. I felt like a soldier stepping into a cold brief. When the doors slid open on the cafeteria level, the building was still mostly dark. Chairs stacked. Counters wiped down. Only the hum of vending machines broke the silence. I walked to the far table, the one where, days from now, those sailors would laugh at the tattoo they didn't understand. I sat. Not to wait. To think. The commander would be here soon. He would pass this room. He would see me. He would see the tattoo, if I let him. But there was something else I needed to do first. Something I needed to face. I reached under my sleeve and rolled the fabric up until the tattoo was fully exposed, the lines, the marks, the quiet, coded memorial carved into my skin. The design caught the faint cafeteria light, the ink darker than the shadows around it. For the first time in months, I didn't hide it. The lie in the files was bigger than paperwork. It was a breach of duty. A betrayal of those who died on that hill. But the truth wasn't coming from a system. It was coming from someone who remembered. Someone who carried the hill on her skin. A soft vibration carried through the floor. Footsteps. Heavy. Controlled. A SEAL's steps. The commander was coming. And the truth was no longer something printed on paper. It was walking straight toward me. The commander didn't speak at first. He stopped in the cafeteria doorway like he'd walked into a memory instead of a room. The fluorescent light above him flickered once, shadowing his face, then brightened again. His eyes stayed on my forearm. Not my badge. Not my uniform. The tattoo. Even from across the room, I saw the recognition hit him. He inhaled sharply, just enough for his chest to rise. Then he adjusted his posture, the way men do when they want to hide the truth from everyone except the one person who already knows it. "Walk with me," he said quietly. His voice was steady, but the words weren't a request. I stood, slipped the folder under my arm, and followed him down the long hallway. Our footsteps echoed. Boots and soft soles, out of sync at first, then falling into a rhythm neither of us acknowledged. At the end of the hall, he opened a door to a small briefing room. 4 walls. Neutral paint. A table that looked too polished to have ever held anything real. A clock ticked somewhere behind me, slow and deliberate. He closed the door. Locked it. Then he stared at my arm again. "That tattoo," he said, voice low, "was only worn by survivors. And there were no survivors outside the 4 confirmed on the Medevac manifest." His eyes lifted. "And you weren't on that list." I laid the folder on the table and opened it. The papers fanned out slightly. Images, timelines, redacted blocks, medical inconsistencies. His name appeared at the bottom of 3 of them. His jaw tightened. "I didn't survive their paperwork," I said softly. "But I survived the hill." He didn't sit. Neither did I. For a long moment, the only sound was the ticking clock. Finally, he exhaled, slow, steady, but heavy, like something inside him had been pushing back for too long. "You weren't supposed to read those files," he said. "I know. And you weren't supposed to see my signature. I know that too." He rubbed his forehead with 2 fingers, the way people do when the truth and the lie they've been protecting start fighting for space. "You think I falsified those reports," he said. "I think someone did." He didn't deny it. He didn't confirm it. He walked to the far side of the table and set his hands on the edge, knuckles white, shoulders squared. "There was pressure," he said quietly. "From above. The kind of pressure that doesn't come with written orders." He paused. "The kind that ruins careers if you push back." I studied him. The shadows under his eyes. The slight tremor in his hand. The way he stood, not defensive, not guilty, but tired. Tired in a way I recognized. "You know what actually happened on that hill?" I said. He nodded once. A small, broken movement. "Yes." His voice softened, almost a whisper. And I know what it cost the ones who didn't come back. My fingers drifted to the dog tag in the folder. He noticed. He closed his eyes briefly. Like the weight of the names was something he carried too. Then he opened them, sharper now. Show me everything, he said. I pushed the folder toward him. He flipped through the pages slowly, one hand steady, the other resting on the table as if grounding himself. When he reached the redacted op code, he froze. This wasn't supposed to resurface, he murmured. That's why it did, I answered. He looked up. Something shifted in his expression. Respect, yes. But also something quieter, relief. The relief of someone who finally realizes he isn't the only one still haunted by the truth. He gathered the papers, aligned their edges, placed them back in the folder, and slid it toward me. I can't erase what happened, he said. But I can make sure the investigation starts tonight. Quietly. Properly. I held his gaze. And the people who buried the truth? They won't stay buried. He stepped back from the table. His voice dropped to a near whisper. They laughed at your tattoo, he said. Because they don't know what it means. He swallowed. But I do. A beat of silence. And I should have recognized it sooner. He didn't salute. I didn't either. Instead, he unlocked the door and stood aside, letting me walk out first. Not deference. Not apology. Acknowledgement. A kind that only passes between people who are on the same hill, even if a report once said otherwise. The morning after the meeting felt different, though nothing around me had changed. Same base. Same buildings with their chipped paint and humming vents. Same long walkway leading from the parking lot to the hospital entrance, still damp from the night before. The air was cool and smelled faintly of pine and ocean salt. A breeze tugged at the edges of my jacket. But inside, something was lighter. Not gone. Not healed. But shifted. I came in early, before the main hallway lights clicked on. I liked the quiet at that hour, before the alarms, before the rush, before the weight of the day found its way onto shoulders that were already carrying too much. I set my bag down on a bench outside the building and paused there for a moment. The sky was changing colors. Navy blue fading to gray, then to a soft, almost pink glow near the horizon. The kind of morning that feels honest, muted, steady, unembellished. No promises. No threats. Just a reminder that the world keeps moving. I rolled up my sleeve. Not to hide it. To see it. The tattoo was darker in the dawn light, each line defined and clear. The hill. The notches. The quiet memorial only a handful of us would ever understand. My fingers traced the first line, the highest. For the sergeant. Then the next. For the comms tech. The one below it. For the medic. The last. For the sniper who never saw the blast coming. There was no ceremony in the touch. No words. Just acknowledgement. A small ritual to remind myself that remembering doesn't mean drowning. A gull cried overhead, sharp and distant. Boots clacked somewhere behind me, another early arrival heading toward morning PT. The world moved. I stayed still. Inside the hospital, a bulletin board caught my eye. 2 memos had been taken down, administrative ones tied to the commander's name. Removed quietly. No fanfare. Another memo replaced them, this one signed by the Inspector General's office. Routine review. Standard audit. Nothing dramatic. But I recognized the timing. The investigation had started. Not because I asked for justice. Because truth leaves footprints, even when buried under paperwork. I made my way to the ICU. The lights were still dim. Machines beeped softly in rhythms that felt almost like breath. Nurses from night shift whispered in the hall, handing off notes, sipping the last of their cold coffee. My station was the far one, near the window. Morning light crept across the floor in slow, golden patches. I logged in, checked patient vitals, reviewed updates. My hands moved with practiced steadiness, muscle memory guiding each motion. One patient, a young Marine recovering from a blast, stirred as I walked by. His eyes opened, heavy and confused. I placed a hand gently on his shoulder. "It's okay," I whispered. "You're safe." His breathing settled. His eyes closed again. I moved on. Service changes shape over time. You fight. You treat. You teach. You remember. But you don't stop serving. Not if the work still calls you. As I stepped back from the bedside, the light shifted, catching the ink on my arm. I didn't pull my sleeve down. A few nearby corpsmen noticed the tattoo, saw it clearly for the first time. One of them paused, eyes narrowing in thought, as if trying to place it. I didn't offer an explanation. I didn't need one. Some stories don't have to be told out loud to matter. I walked toward the nurse's desk, coffee warming my hands, uniforms rustling around me, monitors singing their mechanical lullabies. A new day. Same place. Different weight. And for the first time since that hill, I felt steady. Not finished. Not healed. Just steady. A quiet peace born not from forgetting, but from finally knowing the truth had stopped running. People notice the tattoo first. Most never ask about it. A few make jokes. Some whisper guesses. It's easy to look at ink and think it's just decoration, something chosen on a whim, an idea turned into a picture. But tattoos don't always mark the things you want to show. Sometimes they mark the things you refuse to forget. If you're watching this, I want you to understand something I learned the hard way. You can train for chaos. You can prepare for impact. You can brace yourself against noise, fear, injury, darkness. But the silence afterward? No one trains you for that. Not the quiet hospital hallways where your footsteps sound too loud. Not the office where someone decides what, really, happened. Not the nights when memory crawls up from the places you tried to bury it. The world assumes loud battles leave the deepest scars. They don't. It's the quiet paperwork. The redacted lines. The empty beds. The people who never came home. The truth that someone tries to rewrite because it's easier than admitting what went wrong. And the ink. Mine, yours, anyone's. Can only carry so much of that. The rest lives in the decisions you make afterward. In the small ways you keep showing up. In the quiet moments where you choose to remember instead of letting history fade into a line of text someone typed to protect themselves. If you've ever carried a story no one else could see. If you've ever lived through something that left you different in ways the world will never understand. I hope you know this, you aren't alone. And if this story meant something to you, stay with me. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. Leave a comment if someone you love served, or if you've ever seen how heavy silence can become. Subscribe if you want more stories that don't get medals, but still matter. Because ink fades. Paper fades. But stories, if we pass them forward, don't. They live. And so do we.